Watch. Important thing is to get them standing straight. You don't want your trees to be falling over. And that the top is uneven. If they're all the same height, that's going to look artificial. The bottom we're not too worried about, but I do need to sort of know where the bottom of my trees are. I need to know how thick I want this to be, because the next step is going to be to put some reflections in. So I know this is mostly going to be hidden over here, so I'm not going to spend much time filling that in at all. I'm putting some in just in case something pokes through, but I know it's mostly going to be hidden. Okay, so the next thing, I'm going into the same color, but a very wet brush now, lots and lots of water. And what I'm going to do is just pull down. I'm pulling straight down, and I'm trying to kind of match what I've already got on top. If there's a tall one sticking up on top, I try to get a tall one sticking down on the bottom. And what these are going to be is reflections in the water. So it works better if the brush is nice and wet for this. And these ones probably aren't going to show up much, but let's put a few in there anyway. Oh, you know what I forgot? I just realized I forgot something. I didn't do the reflection of the mountains in the water. I should have done that. Go back in and do that now. I'm just going to take a little bit of very wet base color of those mountains, and just with some horizontal strokes, I'm going to just put in very, very wet the idea that there's reflections of those distant mountains. Mostly horizontal strokes and very, very, very wet paint. That should have gone in first, but I forgot. So I'll put that in, and then I'm going to have to go back and fix up the trees over there. That's okay. Don't make mistakes here, as they say. Okay, I'm going to pull down. Probably should wait for that to dry, but since we don't have a lot of time, I'm just going to pull right over top. And there, no problems. There. Okay, now when that dries, that is going to look like background trees, a reflection. The thing that's going to really make it look like that is the water line, which we're going to cut in next. So here's what we've got so far. What it needs next is a water line. And a water line is like a distant shoreline. It's a little bit artificial to do it with white, but that's what we're going to do. What you're going to do is take one of these, which is a palette knife. There's lots of different kinds. You can use whichever one you like. The only thing that you really need is a straight edge. You can use this small one if you're not real confident. I kind of recommend using the small edge here. And what you do is take some, some white, scoop some white up, just put it down. Get the knife wet, and you want some really wet, watery white color. And then you do this. You sort of slide it back and forth until you've got some along the edge of the knife, and then you kind of touch, figure out where is halfway in between. Where do the reflections start? Where's the shoreline? And you touch and slide it back and forth like that. It's important to keep the line horizontal. If it's on an angle, it's not going to look right. And I'm hoping I'm getting it straight because I am painting this kind of on an angle so I don't get in the way of the camera. And then slide back and forth again. Another line straight across like this, slide back and forth. Now you don't have to touch the lines, they don't have to connect. And sometimes it actually helps if, it looks good if there are slightly different heights sometimes. What that does is it makes it look like there are ripples in the water, or there's like a distant inlet. Some areas are a little higher than others. And you just do that all the way across, more or less. And you can even take a few little and kind of cut them into the water to make ripples in the water. So what that does now is it creates an illusion of a distant shoreline, and those wetter lines become the reflections in the water. So that's our background done. Now, this could easily take a day or two to do, especially depending on how much effort you wanted to put into the sky. I didn't do much at all there. but you could easily spend 2 days on this. And you also could, instead of leaving the distant trees there pure black, you could easily go in with maybe a really dark green or something and put a few highlights back there, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, the next step then is the middle ground, or foreground if you don't have any middle ground. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a little bit of land in the middle ground kind of coming down here. And I'm going to do that like this. I'm going to take some black. And you always, when you're painting a landscape, always put a dark color down, the dark shadow color, and then the light highlight color on top of it. So here is the dark shadow color I'm going to put down. Because this is middle ground, there's not too much detail. I'm not worried that my brush is kind of wet. I'm not even really getting a nice bushy effect there because this is so wet. I'm just filling in the space. But I do want a few reflections down there. So I'm going to wipe most of the paint off my brush, get my brush wet, and I'm just going to pull down like that. Now, it probably doesn't look like much yet, but that paint, because it's so wet, will dry more transparent, and it'll look, hopefully, like a bit of a reflection. Now, I'm not going to have much middle ground in this painting. This is the only middle ground I'm going to have. So I'm going to leave that to dry. It's going to have to dry for a minute. Normally, you would always finish the middle ground before moving forward. But because I know what I'm painting and where, and because that needs to dry because it's awfully wet, I'm going to go ahead and rough in my foreground. And I'm going to do the same thing for the foreground. I'm going to start with the black. And I know mostly what my foreground is going to look like. It's going to start over here. And I'm going to tap in. Now, I'm not worrying too much about texture. I should be, but I'm trying to do this really fast. So I'm going to tap this in. But I might as well do it. I'm going to come back and sort of tap just along the edge like this and see how, because my brush is dry and I'm just tapping lightly, this is the same as the clouds, you're getting that nice grassy effect on the top. Don't care what's going down the bottom here. The bottom you can mush it in with whatever gets the job done fastest. It doesn't matter about that at all. Although I would recommend still tapping as opposed to brushing back and forth. Okay, I'm not worried about the bottom. So there's part of my foreground, but I also know that I'm going to have another layer that's coming down there. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to tap on this side. First, I'm just going to rough in. It's going to go in front like that. So I'm kind of getting just all the really rough black stuff done. This is not very exciting to watch. Fill all that in like that. And then I'm just going to tap over there just to help me visualize where that landmass goes. There. Now, I'm going to go back in. I do want some texture, so I'm tapping the paint off the brush, and then I'm going to tap along here just to rough up the top. So that looks a little bit with texture there. Okay, so there is my foreground. That's what the foreground is going to look like. Then up. There. Now, back to the middle ground, which is almost dry. What I'm going to do is make a highlight color. Now, middle ground, remember atmospheric perspective, the color is going to be less intense. It's going to be more bluish gray. And there's going to be less contrast. So I'm going to make up, so I'm going to take some dark green, I'm going to mix it in with the blue that I have left, and that's going to make kind of a dirty green. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I want this to kind of look like foliage. It's in the distance, so I don't need a lot of texture, but I'm going to tap into it and then tap a lot of the color off. Now this is still a little bit wet, so I'm a little worried about tapping on top here, but I'm going to try it anyway. I'm going to tap just along the top edge. because we know the sun's coming this way, so that's going to be the brightest spot. Get some more color. Tap along like that. Now I'm letting this stuff stick over the black. Now you don't really see that too much. I'm tapping underneath with a drier brush so there's less color coming off. Going back into my dark green, tapping another layer here. But you know what? It's very, very hard to see, so I am going to have to lighten it up a little bit. I'm going to pull out a little bit of yellow. Just tap in a little bit of yellow. It's okay to put another highlight color on top. If you decide that your first highlight color is not bright enough, you can make it brighter, make a brighter color. Tapping the brush into the bristles, I'm just going to touch at the top. I'm not touching very much. Just enough to have the bristles, tips of the bristles touch. Do the same thing down here. It's still not very easy to see. I'm putting a little more yellow on just to make it stand out a bit more, because on camera I don't think you can see much of it. There, tapping a little bit along that ridge, a little bit along this ridge, and see how that, I don't know how well that shows up. Let me hold this up here. You see how now you've got a ridge there and a ridge there. It looks like there's some bumps or layers to that land that gives it depth. So it doesn't just look like a solid mass. It looks like you would climb over that and then there'd be a little shadow. And that's achieved by just highlighting the ridges. Let the black show through in between. Now, we've got reflection there, so I'm going to do the same thing I did up here, and I'm going to cut in a water line. Got some of that wet white left, so I'm just going to cut along like this. Keep the knife going back and forth. Even if you're coming down, I'm coming down as I go because the land is getting a little bit closer to me, but I'm still moving the knife horizontal. I'm not turning it so it's on an angle. The knife is always staying horizontal. It's just the lines that are changing. So it looks kind of like that. So then it looks like there's a shoreline there, and the black stuff we put in at the beginning looks kind of like reflections. It doesn't matter that we don't see the green, because a lot of times reflections are not very detailed. Okay, now we're moving on to the foreground. Foreground, we're going to do pretty much the same thing we did here. I'm going to do a little house over here. I know, since I've got it in my sketch. So I know there's some areas over there I don't have to worry about, but I do want to make this kind of grassy. So we've got to do the furthest stuff away first still. So that means this bit of land here. So I'm going to dry my brush, and I'm going to mix up some green, some almost pure green, maybe a little bit of yellow in it to brighten it up. I think I'll just use pure green for this, for the first layer, and then we'll come back and do more later. So let's see here. I'm going to tap along. I'm trying to decide where exactly the shack is going to go. Well, let's just pretend it's not there. So we're going to tap along this edge here. Tapping in, just touching with the tip to get that nice leafy look. I'm going out over top of the black in most cases. And then I'm going to fill that in a little bit. And you have to be thinking as you're doing this, where's the next ridge going to be? Where's the next layer? So I'm thinking, I'm leaving a little bit of black, and I'm going to start another ridge right here. And this ridge is going to come down, and it's going to meet that one. And then fill in underneath with a drier brush. There's less color. And then maybe I'm going to tap another line, another layer